If you hear something calling your name from the woods tonight, don't look. And whatever you do, don't answer. You're listening to I Heard That Somewhere. I'm Josh, alongside my co-host Andrew. And we've got a special guest in the studio tonight to help us parse through the madness. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm here for the snacks. I'm going to stick around for the conversation. We'll see how this goes.
Glad to have you, man, because honestly, this is one of those topics where the more you read, the more you start looking over your shoulder on the drive home.
No lies detected. We're tackling Skinwalkers tonight. The Navajo lore, the modern encounters, the skin-crawling accounts, and things that walk on four legs but look at you with human eyes. Let's get into it.
I'm really excited about this episode, Josh. This is an interesting one. This has got to be going back to, thousands of years they've been talking about Skinwalkers.
Pretty sure there's Skinwalkers that show up at your car at a gas station at 2 a.m.
Always wanting our spare change, you know what I mean?
There are places in the American Southwest where people stop talking after sunset. Not metaphorically, literally. Conversations end, doors close, lights go out, and certain names are never spoken aloud.
For more than a century, anthropologists, missionaries, police officers, bureaus of Indian Affairs agents, and tribal courts documented stories of something feared across parts of Navajo country. Not ghosts, not demons, not exactly monsters. Witches?
Human beings believed to have crossed the ceremonial boundaries so severe that they inverted the moral structure of Navajo society itself. Today, the internet calls them skinwalkers, but the real history behind the word is darker, older, and far more complicated than modern horror stories suggest.
This is not a story about cryptids. It is a story about warfare, colonial collapse, ritual fear, murder trials, anthropology, and a belief system so powerful that people have killed and even been acquitted for killing because of it. Tonight, we open the tribal record.
This is the Skinwalker Files.
To understand where the modern Skinwalker legend comes from, we have to go backward. Not to internet folklore, not into paranormal television, but into field notes of two men working in the American Southwest during the 1930s and 1940s. Father Berard Hale and anthropologist Clyde Cluckhorn. Cluckhorn? It's a fucking chicken.
Hale was a Franciscan missionary stationed at St. Michael's Mission in Arizona. But he was more than a priest. He was a linguist and an obsessive recorder in ceremonial knowledge, a man who spent decades documenting Navajo oral traditions, chants, ritual systems, and cosmology. Then there was Clyde Cluckhorn, Harvard-trained, methodical, and fascinated by one subject above all others, Navajo witchcraft.
In 1944, Cluckhorn published what would become one of the most controversial books in Southwestern anthropology. And inside that book was a terrifying conclusion. According to many of the people he interviewed, witchcraft was not fringe superstition. It was considered real, immediate, practical, and dangerous.
Cluckhorn wrote that fear of witches permeated everyday life. Illness could be witchcraft. A sudden death could be witchcraft. Livestock loss, mental deterioration, family conflict, accidents, infertility, night terrors, and all of it could be interpreted through the framework of ritual attack. But what outsiders later simplified into single word skinwalker was actually a massive and complicated ceremonial system, one with multiple branches. The four branches of the witchery way. Cluckhorn. Cluckhorn.
Cuckhorn.
There you go.
Cluckhorn described what he called the witchery way. In Navajo ceremonial philosophy, ordinary healing ceremonies were meant to restore harmony, balance, beauty, order, what Dain philosophy calls Ho-ho? Probably butchered that.
Yeah, probably. Witchcraft represented the inversion of that order, the reversal of ceremonial ethics. According to the anthropological records, there were four primary forms. The first was witchery proper. This was the category most associated with corpse poison. Anthropologists recorded widespread fear surrounding something called auntie. Now, modern internet culture sensationalizes this concept, but in the original ethnographic record, the terror came from something deeper.
In traditional Navajo cosmology, death itself is spiritually dangerous. Corpses are polluting. Ghosts are hazardous. Improper contact with death threatens ceremonial balance. And according to witchcraft narratives, witches deliberately inverted those taboos. Cluckhorn's consultants describe powders allegedly associated with grave contamination, objects hidden near homes, substances blown toward victims, ritual poisoning through symbolic pollution. But the key point wasn't chemistry, it was contamination. The belief that death itself could be weaponized.
The second category was sorcery. Unlike corpse witchcraft, sorcery focused on symbolic attack, effigies, personal objects, hair, tracks, remote ritual manipulation. Some accounts describe magical projectiles entering the body.
Which something would enter my body.
Invisible attacks causing wasting illnesses or paralysis. The third category was wizardry. This was perhaps the most socially complicated form, because wizardry involves ceremonial knowledge itself.
You're a wizard, Harry.
The accusation was that they had sacred knowledge and were using it against the community. A seer, a healer, a ritual specialist, anyone with unusual ceremonial expertise could become feared. And then there was the fourth category.
The one that would eventually dominate American horror culture. The were-animal. The Skinwalker. Or in Navajo, Ye Naldalushi. Roughly translated, with it, he goes on all fours.
Go on all fours.
It reminds me of Andrew.
One time, though.
He's on all fours right now.
It's just how it goes.
Witnesses described human beings taking animal form, coyotes, wolves, foxes, owls, dogs, animals moving wrong, animals with human eyes, creatures running beside vehicles, tracks transforming from animal to human, voices emerging from the darkness, and perhaps the most disturbing of all, mimicry. The voice
It's terrifying to think of.
The voice of someone you know calling your name outside at night. Damn it, Jesse.
You caught me.
Across oral accounts collected through the 20th century, certain patterns repeat over and over again. The random stories, rules, warnings, one of the most consistent involved mimicry. Witnesses described hearing relatives outside their homes after dark, children calling from empty roads, a familiar voice emerging from somewhere impossible, and the advice was always the same: do not answer, do not go outside, do not follow the voice. Some narratives describe entities capable of imitating not only speech but emotional familiarity, the exact cadence of a family member, the sound of someone in distress, the voice of a loved one asking for help.
Anthropologists later agreed that these stories reflected deeper psychological fears, the collapse of trust in ordinary perception. Because if a voice can't be trusted, then nothing can.
Another reoccurring belief involved names. Some traditions held that speaking a witch's true name exposed them. Others warned that naming them invited attention. Even today, many Navajo families avoid discussing the subject casually, especially at night. Popular internet culture turned these beliefs into simplified rules, but in reality, the traditions varied widely across regions and families. Then there was lightning struck wood. Some oral traditions claimed wood struck by lightning carried protective properties. Lightning already possessed sacred meaning in Navajo ceremonial symbolism. It appears in chants, sand paintings, holy narratives. Later folklore expanded that symbolism into protection against witches. Again, whether literal or symbolic, the important detail is that these beliefs formed an entire system of behavior: avoidance, protection, silence, a structure for surviving fear.
You're really good at reading.
Yeah, I was about to say.
It's very captioning.
You reading got me a little wet.
I was gonna say that shit got me hard. Bro.
Sometimes every book Smiths have blood. That's right.
I like imagine. Can I get a video?
All
Absolutely.
right. I can't be recording with an erection. Come on.
Yeah, I can take care of that for you real quick. To understand why witchcraft fears exploded in the late 19th century, we need to talk about catastrophes. The 1860s devastated the Navajo Nation. Kit Carson's campaign destroyed crops, burned orchids, killed livestock. Then came the Long Walk. Thousands of Navajo men, women, and children were forced to march to Bosco Redondo. People died from starvation, disease, exposure, violence, and when survivors finally returned home after the Treaty of 1868, the social world they came back to was shattered. Families were fragmented, resources were scarce, political structures were unstable, and in periods of instability, witchcraft accusations often intensified. By the late 1870s, reports began emerging of organized anti-witch violence, what historians now call the Navajo Witch Purge.
The details remain fragmented, but the archival record suggests dozens of suspected witches were killed, possibly more. People accused of causing sickness, livestock deaths, madness, ceremonial corruption. Some were ambushed, some publicly executed, some hunted across multiple regions. Federal officials watched nervously. Bureau of Indian Affairs agents worried the killings could spiral into broader instability. But U.S. authorities often misunderstood what they were seeing. To them, it was superstition. To many Navajo survivors living through post-war collapse, it was communal survival.
Two powerful leaders appear repeatedly in surviving accounts, Manuelito and Ganado Mucho. Manuelito remains one of the most important figures in Navajo history. War leader, diplomat, survivor of the Long Walk. Historical sources suggest he attempted to balance order with traditional belief, trying to prevent chaos while acknowledging how deeply witchcraft fears ran into the community. Ganado Mucho appears in another mysterious tradition, the story of the Ganado Bundle. According to later oral accounts, the bundle contained ritual objects associated with protection against witches, possibly identification rituals, possibly ceremonial materials. But here, the historical record becomes unstable. Some descriptions come from oral tradition, others from later paranormal writers who dramatically embellish the story. What matters historically is not whether every supernatural claim was true. What matters is that people believed the danger was real enough to kill over.
The 20th century's witchcraft beliefs collided with modern law, and nowhere was that collision more visible than in Navajo courts. During the 1950s, several cases emerged involving what became known informally as witch shootings. Defendants admitted killing alleged witches, but their defense was extraordinary. They argued they believed the victims posed supernatural danger to the community, and in some cases, courts showed leniency. To outside observers, this was shocking, but legal scholars later pointed out something important. The courts were operating between two incompatible realities. The Anglo-American legal framework demanded physical evidence, rational causation, objective intent. Traditional belief systems treated witchcraft as socially real, a threat capable of causing illness, death, or spiritual destruction. The courts weren't simply deciding murder cases, they were navigating competing systems of reality. And then, in 1987, one case pushed those tensions into the national spotlights. The murder of Sarah Saganitso.
June 1987, Flagstaff, Arizona. Sarah Saganitsu, a Navajo woman working at Flagstaff Medical Center, was found murdered near her workplace. The case quickly became sensational. Investigators focused on George Abney, a Northern Arizona University professor. The prosecution argued forensic evidence tied him to the crime. Bite marks, footprints, physical injuries, but the defense strategy changed everything. Because defense attorneys introduced testimony involving Navajo witchcraft, reports described ritual symbolism allegedly present at the crime scene. Broken sticks, plant material, symbolic arrangements. Witnesses discussed traditional beliefs surrounding witchcraft killings. Suddenly, the courtroom transformed. It was no longer only a murder trial. It became a collision between forensic science, cultural testimony, and fear. Critics later argued the defense exploited non-native fascination with Skinwalker mythology. Others argued cultural context mattered deeply to understanding the case.
And then there was the forensic evidence itself. Bite mark analysis, once considered cutting edge, would later become heavily criticized nationwide. Ultimately, George Abney was acquitted. To some investigators, it was a miscarriage of justice. To others, proof the evidence had never been strong enough. But the case permanently fused modern Skinwalker mythology with American true crime.
In 1982, stories began circulating around the Newcomb area of northwestern New Mexico.
Newcomb.
It's not Newcomb?
No, it's Newcomb. C-O-M-B is comb.
I know, but when it's all put together like
Newcomb.
Newcomb.
there's about to be some Newcomb. In 1982, stories began circulating around the Newcomb area of northwestern New Mexico. Different witnesses told different versions, but certain details repeated. A large figure, animal-like, moving unnaturally fast. Voices outside homes, knocking on windows, figures running alongside vehicles at impossible speed. One recurring detail appears again and again in southwestern folklore. The thing was almost human. Almost. Witnesses described eyes that looked wrong, movements that looked wrong, bodies that seemed unfinished. Some accounts ended with the figures vanishing into canyon darkness. Others with families refusing to leave home after sunset. Whether interpreted as folklore, psychological contagion, or genuine belief experience, the incident demonstrates something important. The Skinwalker tradition didn't disappear in modernity. It adapted. Cars replaced horses, highways replaced trails, but the fear remained.
Before the late 20th century, most Americans had never heard the word Skinwalker. Now it exists everywhere. Horror movies, TikTok, paranormal podcasts, YouTube compilations, internet creepypasta. The figure transformed from a cultural-specific witchcraft belief into a generalized American monster. But many Navajo scholars and community members strongly object to that transformation because something important gets lost. The original traditions were not simply campfire stories. They were part of an entire moral and ceremonial universe, a system concerned with death, pollution, jealousy, social imbalance, the abuse of sacred knowledge. Anthropologists once described witchcraft as the anti-religion of Navajo ceremonial life, the inversion of harmony, and perhaps why the stories remain so powerful. Because underneath the supernatural imagery, these narratives are really about human fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of contamination, fear that someone inside the community has chosen destruction instead of balance. And in that sense, the Skinwalker was never just a monster. It was a warning.
The archival records surrounding Navajo witchcraft is fragmented, part anthropology, part oral tradition, part colonial misunderstanding, part living belief. Some stories contradict each other. Some were sensationalized. Some were altered by outsiders who barely understood what they were documenting. But beneath all of it lies a consistent reality. For generations, people across the Southwest believed witchcraft was real enough to explain illness, death, violence, and catastrophe. Real enough to fear, real enough to kill over, real enough to bring into courtrooms. And even now, there are places where people still lower their voices after dark, just in case something is listening.
I mean, that's pretty crazy. I mean, that's just the Navajo accounts. There's the Salem witch trials. I mean, there's witches in China. There's witches all over the world. I mean, it's not like it's just a one-time story and it's just like gone and stuff. But I do think it's pretty sad how, like, the modernality of things, how they just, like, push things away. And they, like they said, it just makes it into almost a campfire story. When this really probably did happen. Like, people experience this stuff. I would be terrified. I would literally shit myself if this happens to me in real life. You imagine, like, you go put your kids to sleep, and then you go out to the living room, and then you hear your kids outside. Like,
yeah, you're going to check regardless, and that just puts you in a vulnerable state right along, you know.
For sure. Or, I mean, even if you go back in the room and your kids are just laying there, you check them, it's just that, like, what the fuck is going on?
So if you look up how they become witches or how they become skinwalkers, one of the ways is to actually consume bone, I think it's bone dust, or to kill a very important person to you.
Well, tradition, Navajo folklore tradition, is that skinwalkers aren't mythical creatures, but living people, often in form of medicine men. And yeah, like you said, most notably murdering a close family member.
Mainly babies. That was one of the big thing that I read, is that one of the ways to become a skinwalker was to kill an infant. I don't know if you guys read that or seen that in any of the research. That one really gave me chills. But you have to kill a baby to become this creature.
I couldn't imagine. I mean, like, who would choose that lifestyle? I mean, there's some really sick people out there. Like, that's what you want to be. You would choose to be that.
Well, I heard they're delicious in the crock pot. Some barbecue sauce.
Some cold baby.
Some baby back ribs.
You guys got anything else on these notes?
I don't know. It's just a creepy one. I don't experience anything like that. It makes me wonder if it really was just some fucking weirdo just literally poisoning people back in the day. And like just for hundreds of years, it's a tradition that got passed down. People are out there that just do mean stuff like that for no reason.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot more stories out there, a lot more creepy shit that happens. In traditional Navajo culture, a skinwalker is not a cryptid, a cursed monster, or a feral beast. They are human beings, specifically powerful sorcerers who have chosen to walk the path of the witchery way, while traditional community healers use their profound spiritual knowledge to maintain harmony, balance, and healing. A witch perverts the sacred practices for personal power, wealth, and malice. To fully transition into a Yi Nahaldalushi requires an ultimate act of corruption and betrayal of the natural order, the ritual murder of a close family member, typically a sibling or a child, by committing an act so taboo and destructive to the foundational bonds of the community. The individual completely breaks the humanity and gains supernatural abilities. Once initiated, they use the pelts and bones of predatory or omen-bearing animals such as wolves, coyotes, cougars, bears, or owls to lock onto that creature's physical traits, giving them the power to shapeshift, run at impossible speeds, and cast severe curses. The lore surrounding skinwalkers is kept very quiet out of respect for Navajo traditions and deep-seated belief that speaking about them draws their attention. However, traditional accounts and modern reservation stories often share very distinct chilling hallmarks. The bipedal stride and the rocking horse movement. A common thread in eyewitness accounts involves spotting an animal that looks like a large wolf, deer, or coyote, only for it to behave in deeply unnatural ways. Witnesses frequently report seeing these creatures suddenly rise up and sprint at higher speeds on their hind legs. In other accounts, their gait is described as completely wrong, moving rigidly, almost like a toy rocking horse, because the human anatomy underneath is fighting the animal form. The inversion of the eyes. According to folklore, you can always spot the deception through the eyes. When a skinwalker is in its animal form, its eyes do not reflect light with typical green or yellow shine of a nocturnal predator. Instead, they glow a dull, menacing red or look starkly, uncannily human. Conversely, if you encounter a skinwalker walking among the community in human form during the daylight, their eyes retain a glazed, predatory animal quality. The mimicry from the dark. Skinwalkers are notorious for psychological warfare. Accounts often detail families sitting in isolated homes or cabins at night, hearing the exact voice of a loved one, a crying child, or a friend calling out for help from just beyond the tree line. The goal is always to lure the victim out of the safety of their home. When that fails, witnesses report the unsettling sound of scratching on the walls or heavy thuds on the roof. Santa Claus? I think Santa's a skinwalker.
I have a story here about a guy who was in prison with a skinwalker. A little background first. I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was in there for isn't important. During my stay there were countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more, no one wanted to know more about. It all started with a prison legend. Supposedly years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning we'd be woken up and expected to stand in the front of our cells while guards visually confirmed we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of these routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very off during his check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of another man over him, loosely fitting, draped over him, apparently looked like a real monster. The scariest things were, though, it was the guy who was wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into the prison, let alone the cell. What's worse is they couldn't even figure out who the hell he was. He wasn't documented anywhere, and what's worse than that, they never even found the body of the man whose skin he was wearing. Pretty grisly stuff, I know, and I realize that it's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what prison called him, the skinwalker. Didn't help that the guy never talks, apparently. Anyway, that's what started the whole skinwalker superstition around the yard. Apparently the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it happened, and just about everyone in Genpop felt better for it.
So you know how I was talking about on the last section about the movements where it's kind of like a rocking horse? This story goes along with it. It's called The Rocking Horse on the Mojave Dirt Road from Reddit post Paranormal. This encounter took place in the California section of the Mojave Desert. A user's uncle was driving down an isolated, unlit dirt road past 10 p.m. with his girlfriend. The road was tight, surrounded by brush, forcing him to drive slowly. Up ahead, his headlights caught a massive black shape on the left shoulder. At first glance, he thought it was a Great Dane or a massive wolf on all fours, but the proportions were completely wrong. It had a short, compacted torso, elongated, spindly limbs, and a starkly massive head. I got a massive head.
That's ideal.
Slut. As the truck crept closer, the creature began to cross the road. The uncle stopped the truck completely. Instead of walking with natural fluid gait of a quadruped, then the entity moved with a rigid, unnatural swaying motion described exactly like a stiff wooden rocking horse because the human joints underneath were forcing the animal frame to move. Right in the center of the high beams, the creature stopped dead. It slowly cranked its neck around to look directly into the windshield. Its eyes didn't have the typical green animal glint. They glowed with a dull, internal red light, exposing a face that looked like a distorted, stretched human mask. That's creepy as shit. After a long, frozen standoff, it snapped its head back around, lifted its front limbs, rose completely onto his back legs, and sprinted into the desert brush with a heavy bipedal stride. The uncle, who is the user, noted was a hardened, no-nonsense guy, was so unnerved that neither he nor his girlfriend spoke a single word for the rest of the drive home. I'm sorry, you see that shit, you're not just gonna sit there and stare at it. No. I'm throwing that bitch and driving the fuck over it.
I got a story as well from the Tuba sheep pen incident. This is a famous account from a building contractor who was hired to do structural repairs on an old isolated ranch home near Tuba City, Arizona on the Navajo reservation. The contractor was working completely alone on the property during a quiet afternoon. While fixing a wall, he suddenly heard faint, distinct human laughter coming from the direction of the sheep pens out back. Thinking the property owner had returned, he walked over to investigate. When he turned the corner to the pens, he found the entire flock of sheep huddled together in a state of absolute panic, shivering at one far end of the enclosure. Separated from the flock, standing alone on the other side, was a single large ram. The ram was standing entirely upright on its hind legs. Its front two hooves were crossed flat across its chest. Its horned head was thrown back, and it was letting out a loud, gleeful, unmistakably human laugh. The contractor froze. The ram suddenly snapped its head around and locked eyes with him. The contractor later noted that the ram's eyes looked completely familiar and intelligent, anything but animalistic. A second later, the ram dropped heavily back down all fours and began milling around, blending back into the flock as if nothing had happened. The contractor packed his tools and left immediately. And then there's also the 12-gauge racking account. This account comes from a hunter who was staying alone on a rural family farm during a freezing winter night while his parents were away. Deep into the night, the livestock in the outer pastures began violently panicking. Suspecting a pack of wild dogs or coyotes was attacking the calves, the witness grabbed a 12-gauge shotgun, threw on his boots, and ran out into the snow. The moon was breaking through heavy cloud cover, illuminating the white field perfectly. In the middle of the field, he spotted what looked like two large dogs aggressively fighting, snapping and lunging at one another. The witness wanted to scare them off or take them down, so he aggressively pumped a shell into the chamber of his shotgun. The loud metal click-clack of the 12-gauge echoed across the silent field. The moment the sound hit them, both animals stopped dead in their tracks. They didn't run away on all four legs. Instead, both entities simultaneously stood straight up on their hind legs, turned their torsos to lock their eyes directly on the hunter, and then broke into a dead sprint away toward the tree line, running completely upright like humans, but at an impossible speed. There seems to be like a common theme where like it's an animal, like we already talked about, like the way that they become, they have to get the pelt of the animal that they want to become, but then they always stand upright and walk away. They always do something that's like of a human nature, that's out of character of the animal.
Sounds like some scary shit.
Yeah. You imagine you just gonna go work on somebody's ranch and you walk up and there's a fucking ram standing up on its hind legs.
Tony's throw the bitch and drive the fuck over.
That's what I was like, I'm out of here. I don't need that money. I'm really good on that.
Someone's gonna kill it.
If it ain't gonna be me.
Jesse, you got any other stories?
No.
What about you, Andrew?
No, I think there's just an infinite amount of stories. We just don't have enough time to go through them all. But those were the ones that I found most fascinating to me.
Well, that is going to wrap it up for this episode of I Heard That Somewhere. The next time you're driving down an unlit back road or locking up your place for the night, just remember, some things are better left unbothered.
Seriously, if you hear a voice out there in the dark that sounds exactly like someone you know, do yourself a favor. Don't look back and definitely don't answer.
If you look in your rearview mirror and see something keeping pace with you at 60 miles an hour, just keep your foot on the gas. Look straight ahead and do not stop.
Amen to that.
Until next time, keep your eyes open, stay safe out there, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Peace.